Big Shaq walked into the office lobby just to drop off a package. But when the executives saw his delivery uniform, they burst out laughing. He probably thinks equity is a rapper, one sneered, as others doubled over, completely unaware of who they were mocking. Shaq didn't say a word, just one quiet glance at the company logo and a smile that said everything. What he did next didn't just silence the room, it flipped the entire industry. Stay till the end. This story changes everything. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The elevator dinged softly as the massive figure stepped out, his shadow stretching across the sleek marble floor of Wellington and Company. Big Shaq, wearing a plain brown delivery uniform, held a medium-sized package in one hand like it weighed nothing. His 7 feet 1 inch frame dwarfed the minimalist corporate art that lined the hallways, drawing curious stares, but not the kind laced with respect. At the front desk, the receptionist glanced up and barely concealed an eye roll. She motioned toward the waiting area. "Just leave it there." Before Shaq could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, Lisa, look who's delivering packages now," Ryan Caldwell called out, lounging near the glass-walled boardroom. His tailored suit and smug expression screamed privilege. "Bet he thinks dividends are some kind of protein shake." Laughter erupted behind him. Lisa, sipping overpriced cold brew, chimed in. "He probably showed up at the wrong building thinking this was the gym." More chuckles echoed around the lobby as a few interns snickered nervously. Shaq stood still, unreadable. He said nothing, no reaction. He simply walked forward and placed the package gently on the counter. Then, without a word, he turned toward the exit. But just before pushing the door open, he paused. His eyes drifted up to the bold silver letters on the wall. Wellington and Company. His jaw tightened slightly. No emotion, just a flicker. Then, a slow, knowing smirk spread across his face. Outside, the cold air hit his face. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering briefly before pressing a single contact labeled, simply, AW. The line clicked almost instantly. Shaq didn't waste time. His voice was calm, controlled, dangerous. "Let's buy it." The call ended as quickly as it began. Behind those glass doors, the laughter continued. Ryan and Lisa had no idea they had just laughed themselves into unemployment. They'd mocked a man they assumed was beneath them, a delivery guy, but they didn't recognize who he really was. They didn't know Big Shaq had just made $1 billion decision, and the next time he walked through those doors, he wouldn't be carrying a package. He'd be carrying their futures. The clink of crystal glasses echoed softly in the dimly lit VIP lounge, hidden on the 48th floor of a private high-rise overlooking the city. Leather seats, mahogany walls, and jazz playing low in the background set the stage. But the man sitting in the corner booth wasn't there to relax. Big Shaq, now in a black turtleneck and blazer, wasn't carrying packages anymore. Tonight, he carried a plan. Across from him sat Anthony Wells, a sharp-suited venture capitalist known for turning dying businesses into gold mines. He arched an eyebrow as Shaq slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" Anthony asked, sipping his scotch. "Wellington and Company," Shaq said. "Financials, employee turnover, HR complaints, internal audits. The company's bleeding, and the execs don't even know it." Wells flipped through the pages, his brows furrowing. "This is bad." Shaq leaned forward, his tone steady. "They've got no innovation, no vision, just arrogance, and now they're one bad quarter away from folding." Wells looked up. "You really want to own the same company that just clowned you in their lobby?" Shaq didn't flinch. "I don't want to own it. I want to rebuild it. But first, I want them to see who they really underestimated." A slow grin spread across Wells' face. "You know this is going to be expensive." Shaq smirked. "I've already made calls. 2 silent partners are in. I'm putting up the rest." Wells leaned back, clearly impressed. "You're not playing checkers here." "I'm playing legacy," Shaq said, "and they're still stuck in Monopoly." There was a beat of silence. Then Wells reached out his hand. "I'm in." They shook on it. By the time the jazz track faded into another smooth piano riff, a plan was already being set in motion. Shell companies, silent buy-ins, anonymous investment offers. Wellington and Company would never see it coming. All they'd know is someone had faith in their failing ship and handed them a life raft made of gold. Little would they know, that life raft belonged to the man they mocked. Across the lounge, a legal team was already drafting the first acquisition documents. The countdown had begun. Wellington and Company didn't just have a new investor on the way, They had a storm. The trap was already set. And the wolves? They were laughing on their way straight into it. Inside a sleek, unmarked office on the other side of the city, a team of top-tier auditors worked around the clock. Pages flipped, spreadsheets loaded, phone calls whispered behind closed doors. Shaq had hired the best, former forensic accountants, corporate investigators, and financial analysts who didn't miss a decimal. Wellington and Company is a disaster, one of the analysts muttered, scanning a flagged expense report. Inflated salaries, shell payments, internal misuse of company funds. This isn't just sloppy, it's reckless. Shaq, seated at the head of the long glass table, didn't blink. Good. The worse it is, the faster we move. And they did, quietly, surgically, through a private equity firm disguised under a generic name. Falcon Crest Holdings. Shaq's team made their offer. A cash injection in exchange for a controlling stake. The timing couldn't have been better. CEO Charles Langford had been desperately searching for a bailout. The company was weeks away from defaulting on a massive lease. He didn't question who the investor was. He didn't dig deeper. He just signed. Meanwhile, back at Wellington and Company, the mockery continued. Ryan swaggered through the break room, sipping a designer coffee. Did you see that delivery guy last week? I swear, his IQ's lower than our stock price. Lisa laughed, twirling a pen between her fingers. Watch him end up as our CEO. That'd be hilarious. They didn't know they were already on borrowed time. In the corner office, Langford held a press release draft. Big money just came through, he told his assistant. Company's saved. We'll announce next week. Outside, the receptionist, who once ignored Shaq's presence, barely noticed the courier who walked in that morning, this time dropping off a sealed envelope. Inside it, final ownership transfer papers. Back in the private boardroom, Shaq picked up a pen. The gold trim caught the light as he leaned over the dotted line. He paused, then signed. The deal was done. Shaq leaned back in his chair, a quiet fire in his eyes. Let them laugh one more time, he said. Their next meeting, I'll be sitting at the head of the table. The conference room buzzed with low chatter, coffee cups clinking as employees gathered for what they assumed was just another Monday morning meeting. Ryan Caldwell lounged at the head of the long mahogany table, spinning a pen between his fingers. Probably another motivational speech from Langford about hitting Q3 targets. He muttered with a smirk. Lisa chuckled, tapping away at her phone. Unless they brought in a magician this time, maybe he can make our bonuses reappear. Laughter followed. Then the doors opened. The laughter died instantly. Big Shaq stepped through, his presence sucking the oxygen from the room. No delivery uniform this time. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that hugged his 7 feet 1 frame like armor, a sleek black watch glinting under the lights. Behind him, 2 high-powered attorneys flanked him like sentinels, their expressions unreadable. Ryan blinked, half rising from his seat. Wait, what the hell is this? Shaq didn't crack a smile. He walked slowly to the front of the room, placed a thick folder on the table, and turned to face the stunned crowd. I'm sure you all remember me, he said, voice low and calm. Too calm. You laughed, you mocked, you dismissed. Lisa frowned, whispering to Ryan, what is he even doing here? Shaq's gaze locked on her. What I'm doing is taking my seat at the top. Ryan scoffed. Okay, this is cute. Who let the delivery guy in? Shaq's eyes didn't leave him. You did, the moment you failed to look past the uniform. He opened the folder, inside the signed ownership papers, with his name printed in bold at the bottom. I'm not here to deliver packages, Shaq said. I'm here to deliver consequences. Ryan's smirk disappeared. Lisa's phone slipped from her hand. I now own controlling interest in Wellington and Company, Shaq continued, slowly scanning the room. Effective immediately. The silence hit like a punch to the gut. Mouths hung open. Chairs creaked. A few employees exchanged glances, realizing the game had changed completely. Shaq leaned forward, voice dropping to a quiet rumble. And now that I'm in charge, let's talk about who's staying and who's packing their bags. The door creaked open again, and this time it was CEO Gregory Langford himself. Mid-50s, silver hair slicked back, $1,000 suit slightly wrinkled, and panic already seeping into his usually confident eyes. He glanced around the room confused, then spotted Shaq standing at the head of the table. What the hell is going on here? Langford asked, voice cracking just enough to betray the storm brewing inside him. Shaq didn't flinch. He simply reached down and slid the thick leather folder across the table. What's going on? Is that your company is under new management? Langford's brow furrowed as he opened the folder. The color drained from his face. These are... He stopped, eyes scanning the documents, shaking his head. No, this can't be right. Oh, it's very right, Shaq said calmly, folding his arms. That's a signed acquisition agreement. You were so desperate for investors, you didn't bother to look twice at who was behind the shell company. Langford's voice dropped to a whisper. You bought Wellington and Company? Shaq stepped forward, looming over the CEO like a mountain. I didn't just buy it, I saved it. Your stock was tanking, your quarterly reports were a joke, and your executives, he shot a glance at Ryan and Lisa, were busy planning their next vacation instead of saving this company. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Ryan shifted in his chair. Lisa suddenly found her nails very interesting. I did my homework, Shaq continued, his tone razor sharp. These financials show overspending on private jets, shady side deals, and one exec charging $12,000 for client entertainment in Vegas. Langford's lip twitched. We can discuss this, Shaq raised a hand. Nah, we're past discussion. What you should be saying is, thank you. I kept this company from crumbling. Several executives nodded slowly. Others looked away, shame creeping into their expressions. Shaq's voice softened, but somehow became even more threatening. But see, I didn't do all this just to save a business. I did it to clean house. He turned, walking to the door, then paused. With a slow grin, he looked back and said, and now let's talk about who's getting fired. The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. Shaq stood at the head of the conference table, calm as ever, while every executive squirmed in their plush leather chairs. Ryan tugged at his collar. Lisa nervously tapped a pen. The silence was suffocating. Then Shaq pulled out a sheet of paper. Let's get started. He looked up, straight at Lisa. You, 4 unauthorized first-class flights in 2 months, charged to the company account. And I quote, client development. Only there's no record of those clients. Lisa's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice cracked. There was a mix-up with accounting. Shaq didn't blink. Sure there was. Next, his eyes shifted to Ryan. You greenlit a 6-figure software contract that never got delivered. And when the project failed, you blamed your assistant and had her demoted. That's not fair. Ryan shot up from his seat, voice rising. I had no idea the vendor... Sit, Shaq said flatly. Ryan dropped like a stone, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. Shaq kept going. 2 more executives, Paul and Marissa, were called out for funneling kickbacks through dummy firms. I know how this game works, Shaq said coldly, and I know exactly how to end it. Effective immediately, he continued. Lisa, Ryan, Paul, and Marissa, you're fired. Ryan jumped to his feet again, hands shaking. You can't do this. You don't even know how this place runs. Shaq smirked. That's funny. You thought the delivery guy was too dumb to understand business. Now he owns the building you're being kicked out of. Lisa stood up, face red. I've been here 12 years, and you'll be gone in 12 minutes, Shaq snapped. Right on cue, 2 security officers entered the room, sharp suits and no smiles. Lisa Harris, Ryan Caldwell, you've been asked to vacate, one of them said, motioning to the door. Pack your things, you're out. The automatic glass doors to Wellington and Company hissed open, and Ryan stumbled out with a cardboard box clutched to his chest. His tie hung crooked, face flushed with a mix of panic and disbelief. Security trailed behind him, impassive. But halfway through the lobby, Ryan stopped cold. Shaq was standing near the reception desk, casually sipping coffee, surrounded by a few of the employees who used to fear Ryan's wrath. They were laughing now, relieved, even light. Ryan dropped his box on the nearest bench, stormed over. Shaq! Shaq, wait! He blurted, breath catching in his throat. Look, man, I was just joking earlier. You know how it is. Office banter, right? Shaq raised an eyebrow. Banter? You mean calling me a joke in front of the entire staff? Ryan glanced around. People were watching now. I didn't mean it like that, he mumbled. Come on, man, you've made your point. You win. Just give me another chance. Shaq slowly walked forward until he stood toe-to-toe with the man who mocked him not 48 hours ago. His tone was low and calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. Oh, you mean like the chance you gave the delivery guy? He said, voice dripping with restrained fury. Ryan blinked, stunned silent. Shaq continued. You had power and you used it to humiliate people. You thought that made you untouchable, but power doesn't mean anything without respect. Ryan looked like he might cry. Please, I've got a mortgage, a family, I'll do anything. Don't ruin me. Shaq tilted his head slightly. I didn't ruin you. You did that all by yourself. As Ryan turned to say one last word, a hand tapped his shoulder. Security again. Time to go, sir. He was led to the door. Just before stepping out, he looked back, eyes burning with shame and spite. You'll regret this. Shaq took another sip of coffee and smirked. Nah, he said quietly. I won't. The very next morning, Wellington and Company looked and felt like a different company. Gone were the anxious glances, the whispered complaints, and the fake smiles. For the first time in years, the office buzzed with something else entirely. Hope. Shaq stood at the head of the conference table, this time in casual slacks and a black tee. No suit, no tie, just purpose. He looked around the room filled with employees who had once been invisible to upper management. Young analysts, single mothers, overqualified interns, overlooked veterans. All eyes were on him. You've been working your asses off while others took credit, Shaq said, voice calm but steady. That ends today. A few jaws dropped as he began calling out names. Promotions, raises, full-time offers. Luis from accounting, who hadn't been invited to a single board meeting in 2 years, was now vice president of finance. Jasmine, a brilliant programmer passed over because she wasn't a culture fit, was now leading a new innovation division. Even old Mr. Bennington, the 67-year-old male clerk who'd served the company loyally for 3 decades, got a standing ovation and a newly created position in employee engagement. Tears welled in a few eyes. Diversity wasn't just encouraged, it was celebrated. The walls that once screamed elitism now bore murals of company history, community outreach plans, and handwritten team goals. In the cafeteria, the vibe was electric. People laughed, genuinely. Lunch breaks weren't silent anymore. Collaboration blossomed. The company that once ran on fear now ran on respect. And it didn't take long for the outside world to notice. 2 weeks later, Shaq stood by the glass windows of his corner office. The skyline reflected off the polished surface of the new Wellington and Company. But it wasn't the view that had his attention. It was the email ping on his phone. He opened it, read, then smiled. Get the team in here, he told his assistant. Moments later, the core staff assembled. We just signed a major client, Shaq announced. Multi-million-dollar contract. Gas filled the room. A beat of stunned silence. Then cheers erupted. But just as the celebration began, Shaq's phone buzzed again. An unknown number. He glanced at the screen, and his smile faded ever so slightly. He stepped out of the room, answered, and said, Go ahead. I'm listening. Ryan Caldwell had always been arrogant, but now he was desperate, fired, humiliated, rejected by every major firm in the city, and worst of all, mocked by the very man he once laughed at. Sitting alone in his overpriced apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and half-empty liquor bottles, Ryan opened his laptop and started typing furiously. His fingers trembled, not from fear but from rage. He sent a mass email to 3 major business outlets, anonymous tips accusing Wellington and Company of internal fraud, unethical hiring, and backdoor deals with investors. The subject line was bold: the dark truth behind Shaquille O'Neal's corporate takeover. The next morning, headlines began to surface. Social media buzzed. Blogs speculated. The scent of scandal was in the air. Ryan grinned as he watched from behind a burner Twitter account. But what he didn't know? Shaq had already seen it coming. Back when the buyout closed, Shaq had his legal team comb through every document, install security systems, and keep airtight records of every decision. He'd even hired a crisis PR expert, just in case. As the first wave of questions hit, Shaq didn't flinch. Instead, he called a press conference. Standing on stage with his new leadership team behind him, Shaq calmly addressed the media. All allegations against Wellington and Company are false, he said, and we have the receipts to prove it. Then he dropped the bomb. Screens lit up with audit reports, digital timestamps, and whistleblower testimony, all pointing back to Ryan. Looks like someone's bitter, Shaq said with a slight smirk. The press turned, fast. Headlines flipped from scandal to Shaq's former employee caught in vicious smear campaign. Ryan's fake credibility evaporated overnight. Wellington and Company was cleared. Ryan, blacklisted. Job offers stopped. Recruiters ghosted him. His LinkedIn comments turned into a digital graveyard. One by one, his allies unfollowed him. Even Lisa, his closest partner in corporate arrogance, blocked his number. The final blow came when his last chance at redemption, a job interview with a small startup, ended with the founder shaking his head. Sorry, we don't hire people who make enemies out of legends. That evening, as Ryan sat in a rundown diner, sipping cold coffee, a news report flashed on. The TV above. Shaq expands his empire, new acquisition rumored to shake the industry. Ryan looked up, his jaw clenched. Shaq's face filled the screen, smiling. The game was already over, but Shaq wasn't done. A week after Ryan's smear campaign failed, silence wrapped around him like a noose. Every call went to voicemail. Every application was ignored. Word had spread Ryan Caldwell was toxic, but he didn't know why. Not yet. Shaq sat in a private conference room, the city skyline glowing behind him. He tapped his fingers on a mahogany table as his assistant read off a list. That makes 12, sir. Ryan applied to every major firm in the metro area. Shaq didn't blink. And the last one? Fulton and Marks. They haven't responded yet. He has a final interview scheduled next week. Shaq leaned back slowly, a grin creeping across his face. Not anymore. Cut to Fulton and Marks, the last company willing to even consider Ryan. Inside their executive boardroom, a high-stakes meeting was underway. Just as the hiring manager prepared to sign Ryan's offer, the door burst open. A senior partner rushed in, face pale. "We can't hire him." "Why not?" the manager asked. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, court records, ethics complaints, emails exposing Ryan's sabotage attempt, and a note from Shaq's legal team that read, "Hiring him means losing our partnership. Choose wisely." Within minutes, Ryan's interview was canceled. His last hope, gone. Back in his apartment, Ryan stared at his cracked phone screen. An email popped up. Subject, application status, declined. He hurled the phone across the room. The next morning, the city buzzed with news. Shaq had just acquired Fulton and Marks. The only company Ryan hadn't been blacklisted from was now his. Reporters swarmed Shaq outside his new building. "Was this personal?" Shaq smiled for the cameras. "Let's just say I clean house, everywhere." The media called it the ultimate checkmate. Not only had Shaq exposed Ryan, rebuilt the company, and reshaped the culture, he had made sure Ryan never rose again. Days later, a customer stepped into a downtown burger joint. Behind the counter, wearing a paper hat and faded name tag, stood Ryan, head down, flipping patties. He looked up just as the customer turned. It was Shaq, holding a to-go order receipt. He leaned in with a grin. "Told you I wouldn't regret it." The same boardroom that once echoed with laughter at Big Shaq's expense now held a different energy, one of awe, respect, and something new, admiration. Under Shaq's leadership, Wellington & Co. had transformed from a crumbling relic of corporate arrogance into a thriving, multi-million-dollar force in the business world. Contracts rolled in. Stock prices soared. For the first time in years, the company was profitable, not just on paper, but in spirit. Shaq didn't just sign deals. He shook hands with warehouse workers, ate lunch in the break room, and called junior associates by name. The employees who once rolled their eyes at him now leaned forward in meetings, hanging on every word. "I thought he was just some ex-athlete," one intern whispered after a town hall. "But he's got more vision than anyone who's run this place in decades." Shaq stood at the head of the long marble table, reviewing quarterly results projected on the screen behind him. His tailored navy blue suit fit like armor, but his presence carried something stronger: purpose. "We didn't get here by luck," he said, voice steady. "We got here by doing the opposite of what they used to do. Listening, respecting, building up instead of tearing down." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. Even the senior staff, those who'd once doubted him, nodded with pride. Shaq turned to the window overlooking the city. "When I walked into this building, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to see if the people who laughed could be taught to listen." He paused. They listened. Applause erupted. In the weeks that followed, media outlets praised the Shaq effect, calling him one of the most disruptive CEOs of the decade. Business journals featured him on their covers. Investors begged to be part of his next move. But for Shaq, it wasn't about fame. It was about rewriting the script. The man they once mocked as a clueless delivery guy had now created a legacy far beyond a business turnaround. He became a symbol of second chances, of underestimated power, a poetic justice delivered with poise. Late one night, as the office emptied out, Shaq sat alone, staring at a blueprint on his desk. A new building, a new idea, a new industry. He smiled and whispered to himself, this was just the beginning. The boardroom lights dimmed as Shaq stood at the front, arms folded, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Behind him, a massive screen flickered to life, showing not just one, but a web of companies stretching across industries, tech, logistics, finance, and even entertainment. Everyone leaned forward. I'm not here to run just one company, Shaq began, his voice calm but commanding. I'm building an empire, one where people are valued, where talent outranks titles, and where no one gets laughed out the door for wearing a uniform. Gas spread across the table. His top advisors, investors, and newly promoted executives exchanged stunned glances. But wait, someone whispered. He's expanding into healthcare too? Shaq nodded, clicking the remote. Another map popped up, this time showing real estate deals, acquisitions, and silent partnerships already in place. Every one of them signed under his holding firm, Diesel Dominion Group. In 6 months, Shaq continued, we'll have a footprint in every major city, from delivery logistics to media streaming. Remember how they said I was just a ball player? A delivery guy? Let him keep talking. The room stayed silent. He turned and looked out the towering glass windows, the city skyline reflecting the fire in his eyes. Let them laugh again, he said, because while they're busy talking, I'll be busy owning everything they depend on. Just then, Shaq's phone buzzed. He glanced down, read the message, and smiled. It's done, he said. The last competitor just sold. We're now the biggest stakeholder in this industry. A young investor raised his hand, stunned. Wait, how did you even pull this off so fast? Shaq shrugged. They were too busy watching the front door. I bought the whole damn building through the back. He turned back to the room, his voice dropping into a low, steady growl. They laughed at the delivery guy. Now, I own the whole damn industry. Cut to black. Fade out on Shaq's empire, just beginning to rise.